Hey Emma,
Yes, Madeline.
what do you call the upcoming MMORPG featuring one of Nintendo's classic villains while he makes friendship bracelets, does pottery, and other household fun?
I don't know. What do you call it?
You call it World of Wariocraft! Hello, and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your can't resist a good alliteration host, Madelyn.
I'm your... Wow, this setup just keeps going. Host Emma.
Wow.
Wow.
And thanks for tuning into this week's show. This week, as maybe you guessed from the title, we're going to be talking about Warcraft and Warioware. So www, the World Wide Web.
No,
Why not?
I don't know. I do also think it would be really funny if Nintendo was like, we're making an MMO about Wario.
They're like, you know why Waluigi isn't in Smash? Because we're doing Waluigi, World of Waluigi.
Exactly, yeah.
I don't care what the people say, I think World of Waluigi would be a strong game contender.
I think so too. I
You
think
don't
it would be
get-
funny, not that it would be bad, you know.
You don't get to choose a class. Everyone is Waluigi. No
The
character
Waluigi
creator.
class.
Everyone Waluigi race, Waluigi class. Your profession, Waluigi.
What does Waluigi do? Are they also plumbers? Are Waluigi and Wario like rival plumbers?
Well, Wario
I guess Wario's a
apparently-
game developer.
Oh, yeah, owns a game design studio, as we'll talk about later in the show.
I guess Waluigi's unemployed.
Waluigi is one of the American men that Josh Hawley is so concerned about. Don't think about that too hard. Anyway, speaking of American men, I guess, let's talk about this week's old game, Warcraft.
Sure. So I think we should talk a little bit about the Activision-Blizzard situation right now, but it's a question of whether we want to open with it or if we want to talk a little bit about Warcraft on its own and then get into it.
I'll do both. Hey folks, Activision-Blizzard is bad. And many of the people who made Warcraft were among the baddest of the bad.
They have taken more steps than, say, Ubisoft so far. So, that's a good thing.
That's fair. They at least have a better PR team who is more conscious of the fact that they should be appearing to take steps, if nothing else.
I mean, they've made promises, you know, they took pay cuts. They raised their contractors to, like, almost living wage. Like, getting there to living wage. You know, they've said that they're gonna increase their women and non-binary employees by 50% in 5 years. Like, they've said things that sound good. Ubisoft has been, like, the bar's on the floor because they've done nothing. So...
Yeah.
I'll give them that much credit that they've at least, like, started saying things and making some changes due to pressure from their employees. But yeah, it's not... You can look up the California lawsuit, plural, against them, if you would like.
Basically, the recap, if you haven't been following, I guess we'll just get this out of the way now, is it was a really, just in every possible way, a bad working environment to be a woman or a non-binary person. And the former senior creative director for the Warcraft series was the owner of what they referred to as the Cosby Suite there. So... definitely not something you could be like, but Warcraft team was probably fine.
Yeah.
It seems like he might have been the worst of the worst.
we'll talk about the game, but there is also like a pretty mass exodus of people leaving World of Warcraft earlier in the same month as the allegations came out, but beforehand. So this was actually in response to the new expansion that players really didn't like, and then a week later, the lawsuit was announced, and I'm sure a lot of players were like, well, good timing.
Did you know that award-winning MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV is free to play through level 60 with the Heavensward expansion?
No one's ever told me about award-winning MMORPG Final Fantasy XIV with a free trial with a level cap of up to 60, 80 at the current level cap in the paid version, with the Heavensward expansion, and the new expansion, Endwalker, is coming out
now in December. Well, it's a good thing I told you about it then.
Thank you.
We'll probably spend a lot of the time talking about World of Warcraft as the now far and away most popular entry in the Warcraft series. Although, I don't know, I guess Hearthstone is popular too. Warcraft started back in the 90s as a series of real-time strategy games. So, first one came out in 1994, Warcraft, Orcs, and Humans. And they pretty immediately followed that up with Wikipedia Greatest Games of All Time list entrant Warcraft 2, Tides of Darkness. You'll also find World of Warcraft on that list. You'll also find Warioware on that list. I don't know if we've ever had a show before that features just across the board Wikipedia Greatest Games of All Time, but here we are.
Oh, I see.
What?
For some reason, I thought you were like looking at the timeline of games. I didn't realize we were still on the greatest list of all time. I was like, I don't think Warioware is a part of the Warcraft series. I think someone edited that.
I did. I put that into Wikipedia. No,
Good.
all the two entries in the Warcraft series and the first WarioWare all appear on Wikipedia's definitive list of the greatest games of all time. Still no games past 2017 on that list. That list has not been updated since the podcast began.
We should update it. We should take it over.
You're right.
With all of our criteria. Is there a fishing minigame? There's not. It's not a game, so it shouldn't be on the world's greatest list.
Is there local multiplayer?
If there's not, take it off. I feel like that really limits our options. There's like some Mario parties on there, probably.
You're right. It has to have fishing and local multiplayer. Stardew Valley, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
There you go.
Animal Crossing, technically.
You're right. Nothing but life sims.
But not Warcraft. No Warcrafts.
Alas. So, like I said, first three are real-time strategy games of the build a base, build an army, destroy the enemy style of the 90s and aughts. And the first two games really kind of popularized the multiplayer real-time strategy genre. Both of them... Look, I'm not going to pretend I understand this, but like two really relied on some kind of very groundbreaking way of connecting multiplayers across the internet. And you could play online in one. I'm just not going to pretend I understand.
I mean, using the internet
worked.
to play games in the 90s does feel revolutionary.
For sure. And so those games, along with a few other releases around that time, really made this like a popular genre. And all of the games are set in Azeroth, which is, a high fantasy world setting. And pretty much all of the games feature like a clash between the human faction of Azeroth and the orcs, who are originally from Draenor. And so you'll know those as the Alliance and the Horde from World of Warcraft. So the first game, right, like the idea is like the orcs are from this other world, and they manage to build a portal to Azeroth and start fighting the humans. And as in most of the games, there's like a human campaign and there's an orc campaign. They don't actually gel. They aren't like two sides of the same coin. Different things happen in those campaigns. You find out in 2 that the orc campaign evidently is the canon one, although some things in the human campaign carry forward as well. But yeah, it's like basically, to me, the reference for me is it seems a lot like Age of Mythology, but obviously the correct version of that is that Age of Mythology seems a lot like Warcraft.
Yeah.
But, going with
Gotta
my
put things in the
here.
correct order.
Yeah. So then, of course, the series was very popular, right? Those first 3 games had several expansions releasing throughout those first 10 years and were very popular. And also really, really, I think changed the game for Blizzard as a company that was successful.
Yeah.
In the wake of those. But then for the 10th anniversary of the series, they released World of Warcraft, the most popular ever MMORPG, to be released.
Probably what you know it for.
And probably what you know it for. Yeah, I did have in my brain World of Warcraft as I was going to research this, and I was like, wait a minute. Actually, we're doing the series. So here we are.
Still, though, the World of Warcraft is the majority of games in the series.
It's true. Now they release an expansion, like a full expansion for World of Warcraft about every 2 years or so.
Yeah.
Since it's released. So we're on like Shadowbringers now.
Shadowbringers is from award-winning
Final Fantasy 14. Okay, yeah,
yeah.
Great. Shadowlands. That's confusing. Surely those two companies should have talked to each other and been like, both of us doing Shadows right now? Nah. So yes, they release a new expansion every 2 years or so, and the way MMORPGs work, if you're not familiar, in terms of like in terms of buying them, I kept trying to say paying for them and buying them, and instead I tried to say paying them.
I think that should probably be the new word for it.
That is kind of what the system is. So I think it's less this way now. I think now there are a lot of options where you can just do the subscription and you get a lot of the content. But the general way that it works is that you have to buy the base game, and then you also pay $15 a month for the privilege of playing that game.
Yeah.
And again, the $15 a month subscription now includes like World of Warcraft Classic and like the first 6 expansions. So, if you are wanting to give Activision-Blizzard your money right now, which is, think about that, I guess. But if that's where you're at, there's plenty to do before you would have to buy an actual software license to the game.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how well boycotting really works, but now is probably not the time to get into World of Warcraft, regardless of your thoughts on boycotting. Just, there's so many other things you could be doing.
Yeah. So World of Warcraft is down from its peak player base. I think we're several years away from its peak of 10 million, 12 million, something like that. It's very hard to, obviously the company doesn't really publicize, like, our player base is down. And they don't necessarily publish exact stats just for World of Warcraft, so it can be hard to track exactly. But as Emma said, there was a sharp decrease in the online player base, the monthly player base, right around the time of these allegations coming out, and it's just overall a bit less popular now than it was at its peak. Probably because there are just many more options these days, perhaps.
I mean, I don't know how correlated it is, but there were a lot of large streamers who were moving to Final Fantasy XIV, and then around that time, Final Fantasy XIV ran out of digital codes.
Yeah.
So you couldn't buy it digitally because it was sold out, which is so funny. I don't know how related that is, but it doesn't seem unrelated, which does suggest that a large amount of players were possibly migrating to follow their favorite content creators.
That said, from what I've read, revenue continues to rise. it's still like the idea of there even still being like whatever 8 million players for this game is still kind of hard to fathom for me.
Yeah, considering how old it is, and how long it's been going.
And there are so many I don't know. To me, it's just like, surely I know people who play Warcraft, right? But it's like, who are they? I wonder this about all of the big MMORPGs. Because, of course, I don't play any of them. But every once in a while, I hear the siren song of free to level 50 or level 60 with the Heavensward expansion. And I'm like, man, that would be neat. Except there's no way I'll be able to bully Emma into doing this with me. And, like, it would be weird.
Hey, you probably could.
That's fair.
I got that free trial, like, last summer and then stopped because, wow, that's a lot of game.
But it's like, okay, maybe I could bully you into doing it with me, but whatever. Like, I can talk to you whenever I want. You know what I mean? Like, if I want to play games with you, there are a lot of games I could play. And, like, I guess, like, would Josh and I be able to play it at the same time? Like, I guess so, but that's weird. Like, the two of us sitting on our separate computers, like, raiding. I don't know. And then it's like, surely I know other people who play this, but it's like, who are they? How would I find them?
Yeah.
Post on Meta? Absolutely not.
I mean, there are ways that MMOs have set up that you can find groups to do, like, their dungeons and raids with, without necessarily having to know anybody in the game. Although, the fun part is knowing people in the game, I believe.
Remember when I watched Dad of Light?
Yeah.
What a show.
True.
Anyway. There are a lot of, like, whenever I think about World of Warcraft, I have to talk about the Corrupted Blood event, because I think it's just one of the most interesting games events, like, ever, basically.
Fascinating, yeah.
I will say, listeners, did you need me to describe to you what World of Warcraft is? Was that something that you needed?
I do feel like, I'm always surprised by, like, how MMOs play, I guess. It's basically like you attack automatically, but then you have abilities that you can map to, like, hotkeys. And when those abilities charge, you can unleash them. And you're supposed to work, like, in a team with, like, different roles, like someone to tank the damage, the healer to take all the blame when you do badly. DPS, damage
the healer
per
to
second.
Tank the blame. You're right. Yeah.
DPS to the one who does the blaming, I assume.
Nice.
Yeah. You have all these sort of roles that you're supposed to have in a party, I guess, so that you can take on challenges.
Anyway, you know, it's like you play a fantasy game. There's dungeons to fight, right? Like, I hope I have not miscalculated, listener, that you at least have an idea of what World of Warcraft is. I have never played it, and I feel like I understand. Anyway.
I'm not sure I know much about the plot either, although do you need to? Is also the question.
Yeah, like, we've not bothered with a Madelyn's Lore Corner here, because I can't do 15 years of plot here.
Yeah.
The Alliance and the Horde fight each other. Every once in a while the world gets changed and people don't like it.
That's what I find. I also, we'll do the Corrupted Blood event maybe, like, last before we transition. But
sure. I
also wanted to talk about, like, there's you mentioned it, the existence of World of Warcraft Classic, which is basically like they've remade the game as it existed when it first released.
Well, almost, but yeah.
Yeah, and they've been, like, recreating the patches they sent out as they sent them out. And they're just approaching redoing their first expansion in Classic, which is so interesting to me. It's like a lot of Warcraft players were also like, there's too much here. I would like to go back to the start. And they had been asking for that for a while. And while the developers had originally been like, we're not going to do that.
They were dismissive of it for like a decade. There's a great quote from the guy being like, you think you want this, but you don't.
But apparently they did.
Yeah. I mean, it drove a huge subscriber base, right?
Yeah.
Like, they saw a huge increase in the number of players playing when they released Warcraft Classic. And, you know, it's really interesting, especially for a series that gets a lot of the, like, games addiction shrapnel thrown at it, right?
Yeah.
It's really interesting for them to be like, come back to the cozy 2004 time of your life. I think there's a valid ask of like, the game has gotten too complicated for me and I want it to be less complicated. I think that there's definitely a valid impulse behind that, but it is also, not, of course I'm reading it cynically because they want more players. Like, that's not what I'm saying about this. They're a company, of course they want more players, but there is also the kind of pulling people back in a way that sometimes gets them bad press in kind of the games addiction space.
Sure.
Anyway, it's also interesting to me, of course, that, like, that's the era of games that I feel like now is in the, like, it's getting remastered kind of zone. And it's interesting to me for them to just be like, nope, we're going to do it exactly like it was. And we're going to do the patches exactly like we did.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, everyone is over here now whining about GTA and whining about the Switch emulation. Like, probably as they should be. But, yeah, it's fascinating as like they seem to have recreated it in a way that people actually wanted and was successful.
I mean, it's also key that they weren't like, okay, we're deleting World of Warcraft. And now you can only play World of Warcraft Classic. You know?
They did do something I'd never heard of before called a level squish. But that didn't actually delete. When I read that, I was like, that's lame that you got booted back to level 50 from level 120, but that is not how it worked. So they just changed the leveling system.
By squishing it.
Another thing I really I struggle to understand about online games because I don't play them is the concept of servers and, like, knowing what a server is and understanding servers.
I just think of it as the same as, like, the way your computer only has a certain amount of, like, processing power, but, like, on a much higher scale.
I know. I just think of the idea of, like, you have to choose one and there are different rules and, like, you can't move between them freely as something that I'm sure makes total sense if you're a player of the game, but whenever I read about it, I'm like, huh?
Computers are mysterious, is what we're trying to say.
That is what I'm trying to say. They've also sanitized Warcraft in China.
I mean,
notably.
of course.
So the skeletons have flesh. Sure.
I don't love that.
I think they're human instead of being skeleton. I don't know why, like, that's the thing. But also, so the dead bodies are just graves. Because they want a wholesome gaming environment in China.
With graves.
I mean, instead of bodies. I don't know. I guess.
I guess so. I don't think World of Warcraft is particularly gory, but...
You haven't played on the unrestricted servers, I guess. Blood and Guts servers.
Alright. Tell us about the plague, Madelyn.
You're right. Okay. So Corrupted Blood is a notable moment in games history of emergent narrative and scientific interest. It happened in September of 2005, in mid-September. And right around this time, World of Warcraft released their first ever 20-person raid, which does feel a little quaint now, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But their first ever 20-person raid. And in that raid, which took place in Zul'Gurub, I'm sure that's how it's pronounced.
Yeah.
There was, like, in fighting one of the opponents, this opponent had a spell called Corrupted Blood. And basically what that spell would do is it would get cast on you and it would drain your life force. And it was also really contagious. So any of the player characters, any of the characters around you would also catch Corrupted Blood and be drained. And this is a spell that could drain low-level characters really quickly, But it wasn't supposed to last very long. So, it's just like an attack, right? It's a debuff.
Yeah.
It's something you manage in combat. You blame your healer for not managing in combat, the usual. Yeah. And this spell was not, because it, went away pretty quickly, was not supposed to be something that was able to leave this dungeon, this instance of Zul'Gurub. However, certain characters with certain pets were able to put those pets away during the fight, and if that pet had been infected with corrupted blood and then put away through a programming oversight, the pet could leave the area with the corrupted blood, and when it was taken out again, it could transmit it to everything around it. And that's exactly what happened. And basically, all of a sudden, much like a very contagious real-world epidemic, corrupted blood spread everywhere very quickly. It killed low-level players, right away. Other players had to figure out how to manage it. And because it had this kind of 100% infection rate, basically people fled from these cities that became just piles of player corpses. Now, to be clear, if you don't play World of Warcraft, death is annoying. Your, weapons degrade and you lose some stuff. It doesn't, it's not like D&D, where it's you have to, make a new character or something like that, right? Yeah. But it's still, led to, a complete change in player behavior. So, like I said, people ran away from the cities. Some characters, with healing abilities, basically became medics. You saw some people who were attempting to spread the disease on purpose. Blizzard tried to institute a quarantine that didn't really work because people didn't want to follow it. A lot of people just stepped away from the game entirely while this was happening. And basically, the game experience as a whole was completely different until they were able to make a patch in October that fixed this from being able to leave the dungeon anymore. And now scientists study it, both as a case sample of how people behave in epidemics, which, in 2005, there may not have been good evidence to look at in the real world.
Yeah.
And also of, terrorism, with the idea of people spreading the virus intentionally. Mm-hmm. So, a lot to be learned from a weird little Warcraft event.
I mean, it also works well as a case study because it's more documentable than just humans, I guess. People can, record footage, or you can look at server data or anything like that is actually recorded versus just sort of having to walk around and talk to people. I don't know how people do these studies, clearly. But it's a thing that was in a contained space that exists, which makes it a good case study, basically, versus more mutable, real-world data.
So the developers have gone on to have actual pandemic events, but ones that were much more controlled and less contagious for the most part. So, no pandemics in games, but love a good, unexpected, worldwide, emergent narrative.
Yeah.
Speaking of games and the people that make them, Warioware, get it together.
Yeah. Get it together.
So I said just Warioware at the beginning, but of course we're talking about the newest, the 10th installment in the Warioware series that just came out for Switch in September. For a while they were releasing these what seems like every year, but they haven't really, they had one for 3DS in 2018, but they hadn't had a really classic Warioware for 5+ years before that.
Yeah, the 2018 one was also
Greatest Hits.
Greatest Hits. Although apparently they had to redo it all from scratch, even though it was the Greatest Hits ones. So, despite it being not a lot of new content, it was actually all new content.
We love that.
There's that.
Too bad Wario didn't save his source code.
He does not seem like someone who would.
He does not. Throws it all out at the end. So in the Warioware series, which kicked off in 2003 with Warioware Inc., Mega Microgames, cha-ching, the S is a $, for Game Boy Advance in 2003. Basically, the general conceit of most of the series is that usually you don't play as Wario, but whatever. Wario owns a game studio. Of course, he does.
Mm-hmm.
And he is he's like, for whatever reason, like something is going on where he has to play a bunch of the like tiny little games that he made for the studio. And in Get It Together, that's because they've like finished the game, they're ready to ship, and suddenly there's a bunch of bugs in the game. So it's Kingdom Hearts recoded, basically.
You neglected to say the part where they're sucked into the game.
Right, yes, they get sucked into the game by the bugs. Apologies, that is an important part.
Yes. Wario throws the console in the air in frustration. And this is why you should not throw, like, your controller or your console, because you will get sucked into the game.
I've been pretty close to Super Monkey Ball recently, and that would be a bad one to get sucked into, so...
That would be a really bad one. That's what happened to Kiryu.
He was playing it with Haruka. Just kidding. He's dead. He can't play it with Haruka. He was playing it alone. And then he threw it, and he got sucked into the game. You're absolutely right.
That's what happened.
Anyway, yeah, Wario, now in Get It Together, they've got to play through each of the levels designed by each of the employees of Warioware Inc., many of whom, like, how are they working at a game company, right?
One guy can jump.
Yeah, people can't jump who are game developers. That's unrealistic. What is realistic is that so far, this is the one we played. I played it local co-op. Heck yeah. So Clickbait Boyfriend and I played through the first, 6 kind of level groupings the other day. It goes pretty fast. So far, so each one you kind of recruit a new character, and we'll talk about this mechanic in a minute because it's new to the series. But so far, only one of them is a woman. And I was like, that feels right.
Accurate. There's a lot of girls, actually.
They must come later because so far it is just Mona. All boys.
She's the one with the boomerang, right?
Correct.
I know there's 2, really jumpy girls.
I think I heard about that.
But I know there are more.
Well, so far we have Wario, Jumpy Boy, voiced by Goro Akechi.
Yeah.
We had to look it up. We were like, I can't believe that we're saying this based on 2 little grunt emotes, but this sounds like a voice actor that we've heard before. So Jumpy Goro Akechi, Scooter Boomerang Girl, dude who can't move on his own and shoots things from his head, 18 volt, Skateboard Boy, swimmy scientist dude, shooter buddies. So, one woman, a lot of chaotic men. That's game dev for you.
It's true.
She is a high schooler, too. So it's why is she working at Warioware? Go to
She's
school.
a big fan of Wario, right?
I know that.
Why?
That's
who knows?
Horrifying.
Clearly, she has. She's got some problems. That's why she's working there.
Evidently. Anyway, the game is really fun. I have never played. Josh has played. I think whatever the DDS one was. He couldn't remember the title, but it must be WarioWare Touched. But I've never played WarioWare before, and even though there is some controversy in the reviews about whether changes made to this particular one are good or bad, as someone with no previous experience to compare it to, I am finding it quite enjoyable.
Yeah, so tell us what the gameplay is, exactly.
Yeah, so basically, if you're playing it in the story mode, and I think there are modes, well, we ended up playing the Fire Emblem level 100 times in a row, because we thought something would happen, but nothing did. And Anyway, in the story mode, you kind of go through these like themed sets of mini games, right? So the first one is just kind of introductory stuff, but there's one that's like themed around like home tasks, and there's one that's themed around classic Nintendo games, hence a Fire Emblem Three Houses or a Zelda levels or those kinds of things there. There's one that's themed around fantasy. There's one that's themed around like robots, right? And in each of those, there's a random set of mini games that you complete in like 5 seconds or less that will give you basically like a 1 or 2 word like goal. So it'll be like squeeze or escape or tweeze. They don't all end in e's. I just happened to pick 2 of them that did. And your goal is to do that. And you have 4 lives, and you have to get through what seems to usually be 15 in a row before you get to like a little bit longer of a boss stage that has a slightly more involved task for you to complete. And in this edition, so in past editions of Warioware, you've usually sort of just played as a disembodied stylus or Wiimote or whatever system you were playing it on, right? You weren't a character. In this one, you play as a rotating cast of Warioware developers. And each of them has a slightly different like play style. That's a little bit exaggerated. Again, these games are 5 seconds long, so the amount that there is able to be a play style, right? Set your expectations.
Well, rather than play style, they each have an ability, basically.
Correct.
Right. They have the one thing that they do. So
like Emma said, young Cricket can jump. Wario wears a jetpack and he can like push things. Mona is always on a scooter, so she's always moving, but you can throw and control her boomerang, right? Something in Spits. I can't remember the first one's name.
Dribbles.
Like, what?
Dribbles and Spits, I think it is.
Dribbles and Spits, thank you. Yes. Player 1 and Player 2 have different characters in that pair. So one of them, like they're both in kind of like, they're taxi drivers, so I guess they're in like space taxi things. But one of them can only shoot to the right, one of them can only shoot to the left. So basically I think of it as like there are movement characters and there are shooting characters. And sometimes people have a little bit of both. But you get to kind of pick your rotating random roster for each one of these level sets. And so, of course, sometimes you'll have characters that are really well suited to a challenge. Sometimes you'll have characters that are 18-volt and need to move. And you just can't freaking move.
Aren't there, like, little hooks that you can grab onto?
Yeah, there are. Okay, what I'm saying is I'm bad at playing this character.
Okay. Yeah, so the challenge of WarioWare is basically, like, you get the one prompt that you have to figure out what it's telling you to do based on the images that are displayed. And then you have to be like, okay, so my character does this. How can I get this done with this? And you have to do this in about, like, 10 seconds, maybe.
Less than that.
Less than that.
So it's what they call microgames, which is just a whole new category, right? We talked about mini games last week. And now, here we are, even smaller, microgames. Why don't we talk about macro games?
Aren't those just games?
Are they?
I don't know.
When will we talk about, you know, like the quarks of games?
I hope
Atomic
never.
games.
I don't know what would be smaller than these games, so...
You'd think that, except that there is, like, if you want to think of the building blocks, so pivoting away from the latest release a little bit, and I'll say there's a really interesting Iwata Asks interview about several, actually there's a couple of them about several of the WarioWares, which are always delightful. I mean, they always make it sound like working at Nintendo is just, like, very fun.
I mean, of course they do.
And of course it's because they're, I mean, whatever. I get that they're, like, propaganda pieces. But also, it's always like, oh, okay, like, you're talking to the dudes who were, like, in charge of making the game. So, of course, like, they had a fine time. But they did, in 2009, they made a version, like, one of the releases in the series is called WarioWare DIY. And that one is, in like, basically 100% focused on you get to make your own WarioWare games. which it was just really interesting to read about them thinking about like, okay, how do we kind of put this together? What things can we allow the player to do? How do we make this as easy as possible? It was an interesting little peek into the process of creating these games. And apparently, like, just always kind of like the lead director on it was just saying to people like, the games can only be 5 seconds. Like, they can't be that complicated. You just don't want it to be that complicated. You don't want it to be that complicated. The QA got a lot of shout outs though. They were like, man, the debuggers made better games than we could have made. Who would have thought?
Yeah, I was reading an interview with some of the developers of the original on Video Games Daily Archives. And they were talking about how in the first one, they just sort of had, like, first the people actually working on it just started leaving, like, post-it notes with their ideas. But then apparently the game got spread around, like, different teams because they would just drop by to leave a post-it note with their idea for the people to look through. And they said some of the ones they didn't include were because they were too obscene or because they were too Japanese. So they wanted ones that people would understand globally, I guess. And then most importantly, if it was too difficult to play. So you had to be able to just like look at it and understand what you were supposed to do pretty much immediately. Otherwise, it wouldn't be fun.
Well, what I thought was so interesting about them talking about the DIY game is they were like, okay, so basically once we created this, what we've tried to make ourselves do was say, okay, can we use these tools to create the games from the previous game? And if they couldn't, they had to like figure out a way to adjust so that the games they had already made could be made with this, like, you know, game development for babies, not, you know, software, which was so interesting to me. I also read, and this is probably not true anymore, but at least for the first game, they talked about how, like, basically each of the games was just, like, made by one person, right? So it wasn't like you had an artist and a programmer. It was just like, oh, I made the nose-picking game today.
Yeah. I mean, each of the mini games, like Wario and his friends have like a consistent look, right? They all look like they're the same. But then the mini games have a wide variety of art styles, from recognizably from other Nintendo properties to like somebody's child drew this.
But that's what makes the game fun, and it's what makes the game funny. You know, we talk periodically on the podcast about those mythical teens on the subway calling Borderlands the only mad funny game, which, like, probably still stands, right? But it's always, whenever I find a game that has, like, real elements of humor at its core, like, whatever. Games tell jokes. I'm sure there are funny things about World of Warcraft sometimes, but whenever I find a game that is like,
two in there.
Yeah, whenever I find a game that's on the face of it, really concerned with being funny, I'm like, that's interesting. A comedy, fascinating. Particularly as game storytelling moves more and more toward emulating the dark and dismal world of Oscar bait films. Yeah. Right? It's always interesting to me to be like, nah, like, Warioware wants you to laugh at it, like, all the time.
Yeah, I think it's just, like, really devoted to being weird.
Yeah.
Like, they want it to be as weird as they can make it.
Well, they started out trying to develop a game that they thought Nintendo wouldn't make. And they were like, we were surprised when Miyamoto, like, got involved in wanting to promote it.
That's how you know it's a good idea. I guess
so. I do want to share this quote about, you know, why it's a Wario who runs this company and not some other Mario character.
Because he's stupid.
So first of all, the idea for this game came from like Mario
Paint.
That too, but there was another game that was like directly before it that I'm not remembering what it was called. But there was
Mario
like a game
Artist.
That was... What?
I've seen Mario Artist is the one that was the idea for it.
hang on. Yes, Mario Artist Polygon Studio. That's what
Yeah.
it was. I was like, how is the word polygon in there? But yeah, the developers also talked a lot in some of these interviews about how like they were really inspired. Well, some of them, right? Some of them are too old for this, but some of the team members were at an age where like they got Mario Paint as children, and like that really sparked their desire to become game developers because like Mario Paint allowed you to draw and animate characters. And also because like one of the developers was like, oh, my parents really didn't like it when I like stayed up late playing RPGs, but they liked to watch me play Mario Paint, and they didn't care if I stayed up late doing that. So like I got to play it a lot. And so it was interesting to hear them talk about, you know, the DIY game in particular as like sparking new game developers as like their goal. But anyway, bringing back to this, yes, Mario Artist had some kind of feature in it where you played like some short mini games back to back. And so that's kind of where it came from. And so then they like said, you know, they started to want to come up with this like microgames game. And so here's the quote. We got the idea of using Wario and the other characters because we couldn't think of anyone else who would be the best for this role. Wario is always doing stupid things and is really idiotic, so we thought him and the rest of the characters would be best for the game.
You really just gotta be stupid to be a game developer.
I appreciate the, you know, holding the mirror up to themselves of that statement.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a stupid person.
Oh, man. Is this what game development is really like? Do you have to, like, jump in and battle bugs?
Yeah.
Pluck?
Yeah, that's what I do, QA testing. I get in my computer diving gear, dive on in. Jump.
I knew it.
Yeah.
Emma's a jumping character. This is why she's always complaining about her knees, because she does so much in-game jumping.
Yeah. Really gotta work on my jumping form.
So to bring it back to the latest release, like I said, there's some controversy in the reviews about whether having the multiple characters perhaps overcomplicates a good thing. Having played it, I can definitely understand why people would feel that way. It is very frustrating when you end up in a minigame. Like, several of them mentioned there's a minigame where someone is wearing, like, a disposable face mask. Not a pandemic face mask, a skincare face mask. And you have to kind of pull off the face mask down for them. Mm-hmm. And with some of the characters, this is, like, almost impossible, right? 18 Volt. It's getting a lot of crap from me this time, but whatever. That's, like, really, really difficult. And for some of them, it's, like, when your character's moving all the time. Like, this one isn't that bad, but there's one where it's like there's like teeth closing down on you and the person is missing a couple teeth and you have to stay in the slot so you don't get bit. And it's like, you know, that one's doable with the always moving people, but it's a lot harder than if you're just like, you could just sit there as Wario, right?
Yeah.
So I totally understand the randomness of it feeling frustrating in that regard. But because I don't really have anything to compare this game to, it doesn't bother me that much. I'm trying to like put on my outside perspective eyes for this. That said, this game seems to be all about chaos, so like, I don't know how much you want to complain about that.
Yeah.
Most delightful in my experience, though, were the unexpected Nintendo crossover events.
Yeah.
So I just like was not expecting when it was a Nintendo Classics world. I was like, okay, like these are all going to be like old Nintendo games.
No.
But there was an Animal Crossing one. It was New Leaf, but still. Mm-hmm. There was a Breath of the Wild one. There was a Fire Emblem Three Houses one, which makes sense because Intelligent Systems is a co-developer on this. But those were just like really funny to come out of nowhere. It's like, okay.
Well, shall we mash these up?
I guess. It's like it's a Nintendo MMORPG, but instead of dungeons, you have to play mini games.
Done.
I mean, there's probably a lot of money in that, but I don't know.
It's true.
Man. Nintendo does not seem interested in live service.
No, they really don't.
I really wonder why that is.
And why does Nintendo do anything?
What does that even mean?
I mean, it's just like, sometimes they make decisions where you're like, wow, that's really cool, Nintendo. And sometimes they're like, baffling. I don't know. The Wii U.
The live service thing is particularly really confusing to me because they make so many games that are obviously a fit for that. I don't know. I guess Animal Crossing has already made way more money for them than they needed to make, right?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, they do publish mobile games. You know, they do ship out their properties to other developers to make, you know, like Pokemon Unite, for instance.
Sure.
It's just their own developed games that they aren't interested in doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, they have the Animal Crossing mobile game, for instance.
I know. But do they do that themselves? Surely
I don't know.
I do think Warioware is kind of interesting. I mean, I have nothing to point to for this, but as something that came out before mobile games were really like, you know, before everyone had a smartphone to really play like intense mobile games, it's interesting to me this focus on like very quick, instant gratification, easy to understand games that then, of course, found a real target market.
Interestingly, I don't think WarioWare would work very well on the phone as like a game you play on your commute, right? I feel like people would look at you funny when you go like, ah!
Yeah, it's like too fast paced. You can't like put it down. The whole point of WarioWare is you need to be giving it your full attention. And it's not that anything you're doing is that high stress, but it's so fast that you can't look away when somebody like bumps their smelly armpit into you on the train. Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right that it would not work well on mobile, but it has a lot of that same animating ethos to it, of like it's easy to understand. You can play it in short bursts. Yeah.
Kind of like MMO too. MMO. I feel like every time we talk about MMORPGs, there has to be at least one time when I can't say it. Yeah.
I mean, I just always say more pig when I see them.
Yeah, more pigs.
In my head. And that's probably how Wario says it too.
More pig, my favorite image file type.
Instead of calling it an MMORPG, can we call it a Wario RPG?
Yeah. Okay, so maybe Warioware Inc. is making their first MMO RPG. Wario's like, okay, it seems like there's a lot of money in these massive multiplayer games.
Wario has just heard of World of Warcraft.
Yeah. He's just discovered it. And so he gets his team on making that. But because they're not actually very good at game development, as I assume they must be, right? Mm-hmm. I assume they're not very good at it. Considering that their microgames are filled with bugs, for instance. They make like this really broken one. And you and your friends in real life, your real life friends, have to take on like each of the types of characters is like a class, and so you have to pick one. And that's like what you do in the game. You're the jumper or the mover.
Right, shooter. Yeah.
The shooter, yeah. And you have to go through like a really simplistic like fantasy campaign with that on in order to like test out if this will be fun for players.
Is this actually an MMORPG, or is it just a game that's about MMORPGs?
I think it should be online co-op.
Okay.
But not necessarily an MMORPG.
So it's WarioWare, but like you're playing it with randos online? Like you have
or
raids?
Your friends.
Fine. But you're like raiding WarioWare.
Yeah. So it's not like you're all existing in the same space like it is. It's like pretending that you are, right? Like you form like your 4-person party, you know, like group that you do stuff with. So it's like pretending to be one.
Okay, that's funny. But what do the raids look like?
They're like different kinds of enemies that you can defeat through like one of your team's moves, right? Maybe they're like coming at you really fast, and so you have to like communicate which character should be in the front so that they can take care of the enemies coming, and when you have to switch.
Can I work in microgames here? Can I like tie your special moves to like being able to do a microgame?
No.
Ugh.
No, you can.
I just like that. I feel like Wario, so that, the microgame that everybody mentions in their review, because it's funny, is like there's a Greek statue and you like have to pluck its armpit hair out. So I think that would be good, that like Wario could do something like that, and then like his stench just emanates. Because I assume Wario stinks.
So it's the enemy has to complete the microgame?
No. Wario's not the enemy.
But he's the microgame.
No, but like his ability is like super stinky armpits or something.
Oh, it's inspired by a microgame. I thought you were suggesting actually putting the microgames in there. And I was like, if it's Wario with the armpits, then he is the microgame, which means he is the attacking using the microgame.
What
which
I'm
means
saying
the Goombas
is,
have to.
In order for Wario to use his super stinky armpits special ability, that player has to successfully complete the armpit plucking minigame.
I see. Okay. Yeah, that's interesting.
And you can like gamble for like you can like select the level you want to do it on, right? So if you want to do more damage, you can do it at the higher pace, but you take the risk.
I see. Well, you'd have to set it like to always be that though, because otherwise it ends up being like a turn-based thing, which isn't what an MMO is.
What do you mean? I'd have to set it to always be that.
Well, like if you're trying to trigger the ability, it's like, what level would you like? It pops up a menu that's like, would you like easy, medium, or hard? That sort of ruins the flow, I think.
You have to choose it really fast, or it'll default to easy.
Okay.
Maybe you're right, though. Maybe it's like, okay, you've got 3 ability slots, and if you want to, you can have easy, medium, hard, armpit stink. But maybe you want to have, like, hard, plug the nostril. I'm picking all the gross games. Like, medium.
Well, they're for Wario.
Yeah. Like, maybe you want to, like, split it up, right? Like, maybe you're really good at escape, like helping Samus escape in the Metroid minigame. Or maybe you're not as good at like the draw the blinds from the vampire game, but that one has like a really good power, so you still want to have it on even though it's hard.
Yeah,
I'm thinking this seems fun.
Yeah, that's good. Sounds good. Probably take some finagling. Sounds like it might be a little bit weird.
Well, the balancing is going to be hard.
Yeah.
But that's for Wario Inc. to figure out. Warioware Inc. to figure out.
Yeah, I'm sure they're up to the task. They can jump. They can ride skateboards.
Boomerang.
They can throw things.
Swim through the air.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Good stuff.
Well, listeners, are you interested in a World of Wario MMO? Have you ever played World of Warcraft? Have you since left it? Are you still a player? Have you played the original Warcrafts? And do you feel like they should have stuck with that? That would be a hot take.
They did do like Warcraft 3 remaster.
That's true.
A few years ago.
Are you a classic person, whether for Warioware or World of Warcraft? Or are you a new release, stay on the cutting edge person? If you've got thoughts about any of these things or anything else we talked about in the episode, you should hit us up on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. You can also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games that are in the hat that Emma's about to pull from, leave us a comment in the message board contact form thing, or you can read our blog featuring long-running series Clickbait Boyfriend and Split Screen. Most importantly, though, if you like the show, you should subscribe. We are on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Casts, anywhere that you can find podcasts, you can find Talk This. So next week will be Emma's choice of side quest topic. I don't know if she has something in mind for that or not yet. But
still figuring that.
So get excited. It'll be good. But what are we going to be talking about in 2 weeks?
2 weeks, our old game is going to be Banjo-Kazooie. Kablooey. And our new game is going to be Guilty Gear Strive.
Well, nothing says Happy Thanksgiving, Black Friday, whatever. Like
Black Friday could be a fighting game.
You're absolutely right. So get your kazooies ready for that Thanksgiving edition.
Yep.
Well, folks, thanks for tuning in as always. Emma, do you want to say farewell?
This week, I hope that you get things done fast.